Welcome to another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. You're listening to a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State, featuring writer, poet, and musician Rick Pidcock. Now here's Rick.
We believe that for the movement to continue, it can't be made. And for that reason, we are suspending campaign operations.
Maine's Democratic Senate candidate Graham Platner announced last night that he was suspending his campaign against Republican incumbent Senator Susan Collins. He'll be filing his paperwork before Monday's deadline, so the Democrats are going to have to figure out yet again how to mount a last-second campaign due to a candidate dropping out. How the Democrats plan to move forward, however, is not my concern here today. Instead, I want to focus on what happened, and to what degree we should hold people accountable, and how theology plays into the sexual abuse from those on the right and on the left. I should add a content warning at this point. This episode is going to involve testimony and language about sexual assault, so please proceed with caution and care for yourself. The New York Times published a story on June 4th that talked about rumors that were spreading about Platner sending sexual messages to women while he was married. And according to the New York Times, Democrats began asking him if there would be more damaging stories coming out. Platner had a number of ex-girlfriends who stated how fun and caring he was. But 3 women described their relationship as volatile and toxic. They mentioned his drinking, his cheating, and one mentioned a physical threat. But more continued coming out. He made comments online that were dismissive of rape and derogatory toward women. He also had a tattoo that was a Nazi symbol. But he claimed not to know the meaning of the symbol, and while he admitted being mean in the past, he said he was a different person today. According to the New York Times piece, quote, Lindsay Fifield, 40, a Virginia conservative who has worked for right-leaning groups and Republican campaigns, recalled him as cavalierly contemptuous of women's emotions of our weakness. Miss Fifield, who dated Mr. Platner from roughly 2013 to 2015, said that his offensive online posts reminded me of just how much he hated women. Jenny Rasico, 41, a Maine Democrat, who said she dated him casually off and on between 2019 and 2021, said the posts deepened her belief that he did not respect women. When I saw the old comments that he had made online, she said, I recognized a version of him that I had experiences with. Lindsay said he never hit me, he never punched me. But according to the Times, quote, she said he regularly grabbed her by the shoulders, sometimes hard enough to leave marks, and on one occasion yanked her out of a cab by her wrist after an argument when she wanted to stay in the car. During one argument, she recalled, he twisted her arm behind her back, shoved her into a bedroom, and held the door closed from the other side so she couldn't get out, telling her to remain there until she was calm, unquote. Similarly, at the same time Jenny Rasico said she heard Fifield's words, quote, I was like, that makes sense. This person does not respect women. She said he came to her house drunk, despite her telling him not to come. After this, she described him as reckless and unsettling and stopped communicating with him. Of course, Platner denied any physical violence, but he did admit to being a wreck of a human being and acknowledged having PTSD from his time in the military. Democratic senators asked him if anything else was going to be coming out, and he said there wouldn't be, but said people would probably lie about him. So to be clear at this point, all of this was described in the New York Times piece dated June 4th. It's including accusations of emotional and physical abuse and ignoring women's consent from both a Republican woman and a Democratic woman. And then came the news on Monday. Rasico did an interview with CNN's Jake Tapper and told him that there was more to that story she shared back in June where Platner showed up drunk despite her telling him no.
He was heavily intoxicated, had intentions with me, and wasn't listening when I said no. And
you were saying, no, don't, over and over.
I remember, obviously I've had to recall a lot of this. This is something that I tried for many years to forget. And so small details, might get past me. But yes, I remember very specifically saying, I'm not into this. I remember that the most. So saying that the most firmly. I remember specifically him like grabbing at my chest, and I like hit his hand and I said, don't touch me. And I remember that during the altercation.
And then he kept going.
Yeah.
I know that you have been very reluctant to tell this story. Very reluctant.
Yeah.
I'm actually surprised you're here.
Thrown up 3 times today.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Why did you ultimately decide to do it? Why come forward?
A few reasons. One of the biggest ones is that I think that there are a lot of men in this world relying on the silence of women.
The next day, Jake Tapper sat down for an exclusive interview with Lindsay Fifield. Here's what she had to say.
He isolated me from friendships that I've now, this situation, I will say, something good that has come out of this is I've reconciled with friends that I had become estranged from because they've reached out and remembered, like, he isolated you from us. You weren't allowed to be friends with us because he didn't want you going to certain hill parties that he wasn't invited to, or what he was really controlling of my movements. And so it was, it has been really vindicating, or not vindicating, like good has come out of this, that I have reconciled with or reconnected with different friends and people who are like, oh my God, we wish that we had known the extent of what you were going through at that time. But it explains a lot to them now. But also my behavior after that relationship in other relationships moving forward, and the ways I want to protect my daughters, I want to abuse proof them, and I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to figure it out. And
You'll figure it out.
How are we going to make sure that this generation, I've got 2 little girls, it's another reason that I decided to tell this story, is I will be damned if this ever happens to them. And if they ever find themselves in a relationship and they don't feel like they can call me and tell me immediately. And I didn't feel like I could, and I not only didn't feel like I could tell anyone what was going on, I protected him.
After the allegations of rape, Democrats almost immediately began calling for Platner to leave the race.
I believe that it's time for him to drop out of the race. I think the focus of today should be to respond to the gravity of what so many of us have read, and I think that the only appropriate response is for the campaign to come to an end.
The list of Democrats calling for Platner to step down grew to include Senators Chuck Schumer, Kirsten Gillibrand, Martin Heinrich, Mark Kelly, Alyssa Slotkin, John Ossoff, Cory Booker, Adam Schiff, Ruben Gallego, Ed Markey, Bernie Sanders, and Elizabeth Warren, along with Representative Ro Khanna and DNC Chair Ken Martin. But not every Democrat wanted him to step aside. Here's Virginia Democrat Elaine Luria.
I'm singularly focused on this district, the message of what's important to people here in Virginia's 2nd congressional district. And they're always going to try to find a boogeyman and tie, the Democrat to whatever shiny new thing is going to scare people. But the truth is I have a proven record in Congress, and I'm focused on listening to, supporting, and then representing those people across this district.
So the Democrats have some owning up to do here. Believing women who offer corroborating and consistent allegations of abuse and rape isn't following a shiny new toy. What Luria said is despicable. The Democrats should have believed the women a month ago and refused to platform a man who had such an abusive past. Many of us at that time were calling for him to step aside. But unfortunately, not enough were. So those who are continuing to cover for him need to do some serious reflecting on why they chose to go along with someone like Platner when there were other options on the table at the time. That said, the way Republicans are characterizing how this went down is completely inaccurate. Here was Scott Jennings on CNN.
But this latest victim, her politics were correct and his poll numbers were falling, so now they're able to get some courage when they had none before. They knew he was a scumbag before and they stuck with it.
So to be clear, if there is a credible allegation of either womanizing, domestic violence, or sexual assault, no one in a party should ever stand by the candidate. Because if that is your statement, and I'd love to hear from you on this, if that is your blanket assertion, I got to tell you, Herschel Walker should have been out. Donald Trump should have been out of the race. You got Roy Moore should have been running. I could go on in candidates, and I know that's not the ultimate test, but there's a hypocrisy to it.
The idea that the previous allegations were from a Republican and that the latest allegations were from a Democrat is simply false. Rasico didn't just show up this week. She was speaking up on June 4th, too. Of course, the Democrats should have believed the women a month ago. But at that time, the women didn't mention what Rasico just told CNN on Monday. Or if they did, the New York Times chose not to report it. So Monday's news was an escalation. My point is that to act like the news a month ago was from a Republican woman, and that the only thing that triggered the Democrats to respond this week was his poll numbers, is either an ignorant or dishonest presentation of the facts. Women from both parties were accusing him last month. Democrats should have believed the women then, and the accusations escalated this week, so thankfully they're believing the women now. And that led to Platner finally dropping out of the race. I'm not going to play his entire video. It's actually pretty gross to hear him drone on, acting like he's an everyday regular person who is really the victim here. But I want to highlight what he said the Democrats have done in response to him.
I think it's really important to understand why this is happening in the timeline, why this is happening right now, much like October, when the first attack started, much like the news that was created the week before the primary. There is a reason that this is happening now. I only have until July 13th until I am officially the nominee. This was the last week to try to get me off of the ballot. And that's why this is occurring. It's not the false allegations, though, that have brought us to where we are. It's the fact that they are being used by the political establishment to put structural pressure on us. We live in a political system that is not built for normal people. It is a system that is built structurally to make sure that movements like ours cannot flourish. That if they begin to succeed, they can be crushed. What we have accomplished here, you made possible. The people of Maine, the volunteers, the voters, the grassroots donors. And I have all the faith in the world that we could win if we could continue to harness that. But the brutal political reality is that they are going to take everything away from us. Those in power who have the ability to do so are using these allegations as an excuse to take away all of the things that we need to run a campaign. We are going to lose our ability to fundraise. We are going to lose our ability to access voter data. We are going to lose all of the things that any campaign needs on the basic level simply to function. Larger organizations, the national level party, the bigger donor networks, they have all committed to spending no money in this race if I'm in it. They would rather see Susan Collins win than have me be the next senator from Maine.
According to Platner, the Democrats gave him no choice but to drop out of the race. They cut him off from fundraising, took away his voter data, said they wouldn't spend any money if he's in it. They made it to where his campaign couldn't even function, so he's out. Of course, Platner went on to talk about how he expects the Democrats to move forward, but he really doesn't have a say in that, nor should he. And quite frankly, Republicans shouldn't be talking about Platner either, given their support of Ken Paxton and Donald Trump. Notice the difference here. Democrats responded to a candidate that had serious allegations against him by cutting him off from all support to the point where he had no choice but to drop out of the race. They should have done this earlier, but eventually they got there. Unlike Platner, however, Trump has far more than allegations against him. He's been found liable in court for sexual abuse and has been ordered to pay E. Jean Carroll $5.8 million. He's also been ordered to pay $83 million in a separate case. Yet Republicans have voted for him in 3 primaries and in 3 general elections. And while Platner has denied the allegations, Trump has openly bragged about sexually assaulting women. Yet Republicans have voted for him in 3 primaries and in 3 general elections. They even attempted an insurrection for him, scaling the walls of the U.S. Capitol and building a noose for the former Vice President Mike Pence because Pence wouldn't help him cheat. So Democrats need to own the fact that they allowed a man like Platner to be nominated for a Senate seat. And Republicans need to own the fact that they voted for a man repeatedly who not only bragged about sexually assaulting women, but who has been found legally liable over sexually abusing women to the tune of nearly $90 million in legal penalties. And that brings me to the theology of it all. At the heart of this story is the idea of a man seeing and taking control of a woman's body. He was, in a sense, assuming the role of emperor over a woman's body. That's how I interpret lust. Lust isn't being attracted to women. It's not being turned on by women. It's not engaging in consensual sexual activity with women. It's entitling yourself to women's bodies by assuming the role of emperor over them. It's hierarchy. It's saying, I'm up here, you're down there, and we relate to one another in a dynamic of authority and submission. And the thing about hierarchy is that it's not confined to one particular party. You can cultivate entitled power over your neighbor as a Democrat and as a Republican. Despite the fact that most of what I write or speak against is on the right, I'm not actually against a particular party and for another party. I'm against patriarchy in all its forms. And I'm against setting up hierarchies of authority and submission that strengthen the power of those at the top, dehumanize those below, and wage war against those who won't submit. I define the world as the way of empire. The lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life are the ways of empire, seeing and taking another for the service of oneself. So of course we're going to see that manifest itself across party lines. But I expect those who preach the gospel to offer a better news, if for no other reason than the fact that the word gospel means good news. If you're going to claim to have a better news, then you need to demonstrate it by your fruit. And across the board, the Republicans are the ones who promote authoritarianism and political violence in greater numbers than the Democrats do. And white evangelicals are the most ardent supporters of authoritarianism and political violence. That's not an unsubstantiated claim. We've presented the sociological data from the Public Religion Research Institute on this podcast many times. But I want to close by addressing a question. How come when abuse shows up on the right, I talk about the right's theology, but when abuse shows up on the left, I don't examine liberal theology in the same way? It's a totally fair question. The abuse comes from patriarchal entitlement that can appear on both the left and the right. But it appears on the right more because the right uses theology to sacralize those power dynamics of authority and submission. The right defines its gospel and its trinity in power dynamics of authority and submission. So I often go back to the symbol of communion. I believe in communion without a captain's chair. As Robert P. Jones and Diana Butler Bass have described, communion is a round table and an ever-expanding table. The problem comes when someone tries to assume the role of a captain at the table, bending everyone's will to their own regardless of consent. That's the dynamic of rape, and it's the theological shape of sacralized power that we see on the right. And unfortunately, this fruit of patriarchy has so permeated our culture that we have an entire civil religion and history of straight white men sitting in captain's chairs. That's why all but one of our presidents have been straight white men. So, of course, patriarchal entitlement is going to show up on both sides of the aisle. It's part of the American story. But it's also why we need to be able to talk about our history, so we can recognize these dynamics and repent. But the right sacralizes these dynamics with theology and then demonizes anyone who reflects on our history of it all. The left doesn't actively use theology to defend these dynamics. So I'm going to address the manifestation of patriarchy on the left, and I'll even name if I see theological justifications for it on the left. But because the theology is explicitly stated on the right far more often, then I'm going to have to deal with the theology on the right that sacralizes men in captain's chairs far more often. That's why in my coverage last year of Tim Whitaker and the New Evangelicals, I said the problem was that they didn't go far enough in deconstructing the patriarchy within themselves. The solution to violence among liberals isn't to say, oh well, both sides do it, so theology has nothing to do with what's going on here, and then double down on conservative theologies of hierarchy and retribution. That's only going to exacerbate the problem. The solution is to continue identifying where we've entitled ourselves to the bodies of others against their consent. So we have a lot of work to do, both on the left and the right, because none of us are immune to the poison of patriarchy. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, subscribe, and rate us on your favorite podcast platform, and we'll be back with another episode on Monday.
This has been another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. The episode you've just heard is part of a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State. Be sure to follow BNG daily at baptistnews.com and subscribe to get notifications about future episodes. Baptist News Global is a national nonprofit news service that is independent, free, and faithful. BNG is supported by readers and listeners like you. Learn more at baptistnews.com.
This episode was produced and edited by Mac Bowles of TKG Communications, LLC, Dallas, Texas.